From downtown Scranton, this is Northeast Current. WQPX invites you to join us as we explore public affairs, current events, and arts and culture in northeastern and central Pennsylvania. Now, let's meet today's guests on Northeast Current. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Northeast Current. I'm your host, Tony Schwartz, and today's a lot of lessons in our show today. We're going to have some history lessons, some life learning lessons today, all revolving around this book, My Life in America Before, During, and After the Civil War, by Louis Hensel. Actually, it's kind of by Louis Hensel, but it's also by Sigrid Wilshinksky. Did I get that right, Sigrid?
Yes.
All right. And you know what? I'm going to let you explain exactly what this book is all about. All right?
Okay. The book is a translation of letters that Louis Hensel wrote to family in Germany. And he describes his adventures, meeting Abraham Lincoln. He describes travel up and down the United States, mostly the East Coast, during the Civil War, which was quite exciting, and his life, what he did, how he survived. That's pretty much it.
So, you know, we were talking before we got the show started, and we talked a lot about Louis Hensel, but for the folks at home who maybe don't have a clue as to Louis Hensel is, give them a little bit of the history of this fella.
Louis Hensel was born in 1817 in Germany, of a well-to-do family. His father had a business creating furniture, and he learned originally to turn furniture. He left Germany at age 17, went through Holland and into France. In France, he started to paint. He studied sculpting, and he became a very, very competent ivory engraver, which was big in those days, combs and, you know, fans and stuff. And he actually, once he came to the United States, he had to leave. He had a well-going business in Paris with employees and everything. And during the French Revolution in 1847, he left. Got into some problems, apparently, and had to leave. Came to the United States, started work the first day he was here as an ivory carver. And one of his pieces, he describes somebody brought in a whole elephant tooth and told him to carve a fireman carrying a girl down a ladder, a child. And he didn't know what it was for, got paid very well because it took him a long time. And then they found out in the New York newspaper that that carving was represented and shown at the Crystal Palace in London.
Really?
At the opening there of the World Exposition.
Wow. So before you came to this country, he had quite a history going for himself already in Europe.
Yes.
And then coming to this country, first days here he gets a job.
Yes. He walked the whole length of Broadway up and back until he found a job. He was in his late 30s already.
Carving ivory.
Yes.
But the story doesn't stop there with this guy. We were joking before, but it's like a real life Forrest Gump with this guy. He just goes from one thing to another. So
he's more brilliant.
Yeah, more brilliant.
He was very well educated.
But so where does he go from the ivory carving then?
When he had enough money, he took his wife, and then he already had his son, who later became a well-known photographer in the area. He took them to Long Island. He bought a little farm, did very well there, raising animals, and including found a field full of blackberries. He hired women to pick the blackberries, took them in the night to Manhattan to sell on the market. So wherever he could, he made money. And from Long Island, after a few mishaps, he went to Brooklyn, New York, to Williamsburg, bought a little store there. And one other thing he always did, he loved horses. And there are a lot of stories about horses in his book.
There's a lot of animal stories.
Yeah, he loves horses. And his horse, Peter, was a stallion. He was the first horse whisperer. It was a wild animal that nobody could touch, and it became like a dog to him. So in Williamsburg, the war started, the Civil War. And he signed up with the cavalry in Manhattan and became a master of the horse. Great money, $100 a month, I think it was. And was training the other people and cavalry and took care of the horses. And then they ran out of horses. Washington didn't send them enough horses. And his company was supposed to become a cannoneer outfit. And he said, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for cannons. I signed up for horses. You got to let me go. And he went to the headquarters in Manhattan, and they did release him from his oath.
That's neat. They don't work that way today. When you sign up, you do it, whatever they tell you to do.
That's right.
A little different back then.
So from there, he had the shop, and he became a part-time actor in a local theater. Let them know that he could make and create props. They hired him for that. Through that job, he learned to know about the theater in New York. He crossed the river, every night he crossed the river to set up props in the theater. And then when the German opera was developed in Manhattan, he became a member of the staff there. To start off, again, setting up props and folding them and putting them away afterward. And he had to take a boat across the Hudson, across the East River every night, back and forth, to do this job at night. And in the daytime there was a store, which his wife also took care of. But with the opera company, not just did he do the props and take care of the stage, he also, for extra money, sang in the choir. When the opera traveled and a horse was needed on stage, he would be the one riding the horse on stage. So he did whatever he could to make money. He was very multifaceted.
And while Louis was traveling with the opera company, they had a stop in Washington, and tell that story.
He very wonderfully describes Washington, D.C. at the beginning of the Civil War. The hundreds and thousands of people, animals, there was no room. And he said people came, signed up, got their $100, and were gone the next day. It was quite a bit of chaos at the time. And I don't know if you want to hear about the story where he slept in the theater because he couldn't find a room.
No, who did he meet?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
Yes. Abraham Lincoln came to the opera every time they played, twice a week. He really loved it. And he spoke some broken German and came down the back stairs and onto stage in between the shows, the acts, and told them jovially, you know, when you have the time, come visit me at the White House. And Louis Hensel said, I'm going to take him up on that. He couldn't get the crew together, but he put his black suit on one day, walked over to the White House. Little trepidation, he said, but what can he do? He invited me. As he arrived at the White House, there were some coaches arriving with some American Indian chiefs and 2 translators, also in black suits. So he sidled up to the translators. When they were ushered into the White House, he walked right in, pretending to be a translator. They were seated. They were served drinks and no alcohol, and cookies and things. And Abraham Lincoln came in and shook everybody's hands. So Louis Hensel, to his credit, shook the hand of Abraham Lincoln. And then in his letters described the speeches of the Indian chiefs as well as Abraham Lincoln's answers. And I don't think it's recorded anywhere else.
Wow.
It's quite emotional, I think, when you read it.
Now, again, to clarify things for the folks at home, because we keep talking about the letters.
Yeah.
So let's make sure the folks at home understand what this book is. It's not necessarily a book written by Louis Hensel,
No,
right?
no.
Tell the folks at home what's in this book.
These are letters that he wrote to a granddaughter in Germany that he had never met. And he describes life in America and all his adventures in such vivid detail. Things that, would be lost if it weren't in a book and published. Beautiful things, including the ice breakup in front of, on the Hudson River in Albany. As the company left, he almost lost his life. His guide and young boy lost their lives at that instant. But the interesting thing is, they already, the telegraphs called ahead, and every town knew within an hour or so when the ice breakup would come in their area. So it's fascinating how much these people took care of already, you know.
So these letters now, back and forth between him and his granddaughter.
Yes.
And in reading the book and talking to you earlier, now he lived a long life, 91?
Yes, 91 years, and that's in the late 1800s.
And he came to this country at what age again, roughly?
In his late 30s.
Late
37, I think.
So
30,
he lost all contact with his family most of that time, right? Except for the last...
Well, this was not his real family. This was a family that was not part of his family.
Okay.
He had a daughter that he wasn't really had any contact with. That's why.
For all those years. So what I'm getting at, though, is the letters in this book basically are the last 10 or so years of his life, correct?
Yes, that's when he wrote. From the
Yeah,
late,
these aren't, right.
No, he died in 1908 at age 91, and he started writing in the late 1890s,
Okay.
mid 1890s.
So he's never, and he never got to meet this granddaughter, right? It was only,
no,
it was
no,
only through the
no,
letters
no.
back and forth.
And he actually hid her. His family was not aware of the
Oh.
German connection.
Okay, so now let's get to the more local hook. I mean, we've talked about Europe and New York City and up and down the East Coast. Where does he eventually end up in his adventures?
In Hawley.
In
Hawley,
Pennsylvania. we didn't mention that
No,
yet.
no, that's-
right here in Pike
yeah.
and Wayne County, right?
Yep. Downtown Hawley is
Downtown.
where his son had a photography and art shop, and he lived upstairs in a room, excuse me, which he describes beautifully. From the windows, the heat, everything. Yeah, he spent the last 10, 15 years of his life in Hawley. And in his old age, in his 80s, he became a music teacher to local people.
In his 80s,
Yep.
he begins
Yes.
teaching
He
music.
would not, I mean, he would not live without doing something and earning some money.
So, Louis Hensel, I guess today they would call him a workaholic, but I don't think that's fair.
No.
Because Louis Hensel always found a way to provide for himself and his family.
Yes, yes.
This is back in the day when there was no welfare, there
No.
was no other handouts that people could go
Yep.
to for help at the time. You made a buck or you starved.
Yeah, you had to work to eat.
You had to work to eat, and he learned a variety of ways throughout
Yes,
his
and
life.
he took opportunities.
He-
Anything that showed itself, he would pick up and change his life, learn something new. He was always learning, reading, learning, even into his old age. He was very, very active and physically active.
Physically and mentally
Yes.
active. I mean, there too, because he dying in 1908 at the age of 91. I don't think there were many people at that time living to the age
No,
of
very rare,
91.
very
It's another testament to a day's work, physically and mentally, keeps you going.
Yeah, He describes a lot of adventures. He was very adventurous. I mean, he took chances. He almost lost his life a few times, not just crossing the ice on the Hudson. He, with a friend, went to Niagara Falls when the opera company was playing in Buffalo, and crossed an old existing bridge covered in ice. There was a little island with an observation tower in the center of the falls at that time. And they crossed and almost fell down the falls. And he describes everything beautifully.
Really?
That's,
I didn't get to read that.
Yeah.